You might not know this, but there is one specific kind of document that's almost impossible to fabricate. Not a personal diary, not a newspaper article, not a letter to a family member. It is actually something called a construction delay report that is filed to company investors. When a railroad company stops work for 3 weeks, money stops moving. Investors demand explanations. Engineers file reports. Foremen submit written accounts that become part of a permanent paper trail. Nobody invents a discovery that costs their employer thousands of dollars a day. Nobody fabricates a finding that requires official correspondence with state archaeological societies, that triggers visits from federal institutions, that appears in company ledgers as an unexplained work stoppage. That's where this entry starts, not with folklore, not with legend, with the kind of documentation that exists specifically because it had to. April 3rd, 1879. A Baltimore and Ohio Railroad crew laying track 3 miles east of Chillicothe, Ohio, struck something 8 feet below grade. Not bedrock, not a boulder, a stone chamber, perfectly rectangular walls, fitted stones weighing hundreds of pounds each, a corbelled ceiling rising to 9 feet at the centre. The foreman's report, filed with the company and preserved, recorded the dimensions with engineering precision, 12 feet by 18 feet. Inside, arranged in a circle around what the report described as a copper altar, 7 complete skeletal remains, all over 8 feet tall. The largest measured at 8 feet 9 inches crown to heel, skull circumference 28 inches. A normal human skull measures 22 to 24. The bones were collected, crated, and shipped to the Smithsonian Institution. Construction resumed. For most purposes, that's where this story would end, but April 3rd wasn't an isolated incident. It was the first entry in a 4-month record that no railroad company could afford to fabricate, and no single institution has ever adequately explained. Let me be precise about what the Baltimore and Ohio Railroad documented between April and August of 1879. Because the nature of railroad records matters here. Railroad companies in 1879 operated on extremely thin margins. Track laying crews were paid by the day. Equipment sat idle during stoppages. Investors received quarterly reports showing progress against projected timelines. Every delay had to be justified in writing, in language specific enough to satisfy people whose money was at stake. The Baltimore and Ohio Railroad stopped work at least 9 separate times during the spring and summer of 1879 to deal with discoveries they couldn't simply bulldoze through. These aren't oral accounts from witnesses decades later. These are work stoppage reports, filed contemporaneously, specifying locations, dates, and the nature of what was found. The second discovery came on April 29, 1879, 23 miles south of Chillicothe, near Portsmouth, Ohio. The grading team exposed masonry, a wall 15 feet long. The site engineer's notes, filed with the company, described the stones as dressed and fitted with a precision exceeding our own stonework. When the crew excavated around the exposed section, they found a doorway, 8.5 feet tall, and beyond it, a passage leading into darkness. What they found next left them both astonished and terrified. They found 3 skeletal remains, all over 8 feet in length, all showing signs of traumatic death, crushed skulls, fractured ribs, as if the structure had come down on them suddenly. But it was what they were wearing that changed the nature of this discovery. Copper armour, not ornamental. Functional breastplates fitted to torsos far larger than any modern human, arm guards, shin guards, and beside them, weapons scaled to match. A copper axe head, weighing 14 pounds. A standard axe head weighs 2 to 3 pounds. This wasn't ceremonial equipment placed in a burial. This was functional gear, designed for hands and arms capable of wielding implements that a normal person couldn't lift from the ground. The Cincinnati Commercial Tribune ran a detailed account on May 2nd, 1879, including measurements, descriptions of the armour, and sketches of the axe head. The article noted that representatives from the Smithsonian Institution were travelling to Portsmouth to examine the site. A follow-up article 2 weeks later stated only that materials had been transferred to Washington for study and work had resumed. No analysis, no conclusions, no explanation of what Native American culture produced fitted copper armour for 8-foot warriors. The story simply stopped. May 17th, 1879. Near Charleston, West Virginia. Railroad crews excavating for a bridge abutment broke through into a subterranean chamber. Stone walls, flat ceiling, and inside, arranged on stone benches along the walls, 12 skeletal remains, all giants. The crew foreman, Thomas Barker, documented the find in a letter to his sister that survived in family records. Barker wrote that the smallest skeleton measured 7 feet 5 inches, the largest 9 feet 2. The tools found with the remains told the same story as Portsmouth: agricultural implements with handles 5 to 6 feet long, copper blades massive enough that Barker wrote they farmed using equipment that would break a normal man's back. This wasn't a tomb. This was a place where people had lived and worked. Barker's letter ends with a question. Who were these people, and how did they come to be buried in a chamber that required engineering knowledge to construct? The Smithsonian sent a team to Charleston in late May. The bones were collected. The chamber was documented. Then the railroad company filled it with rubble and concrete before completing the bridge abutment. The reason given was structural stability. The chamber that didn't match any known Native American building tradition was buried again, this time permanently under the foundation of a railroad bridge that still stands. By June 1879, the pattern had established itself with a consistency that no one involved could ignore. Discovery, work stoppage, report filed, Smithsonian notified, specimens collected, construction resumed, no public analysis, no acknowledgement. The largest single discovery came on June 23, 1879, near Lexington, Kentucky. A crew cutting through what local maps labelled an Indian mound found something that made them stop working and refused to continue until authorities arrived. It wasn't a mound, it was a collapsed building. The cut had exposed the interior of a structure, stone walls still standing in places to heights of 12 to 15 feet, multiple rooms, and in what appeared to be a central chamber, a floor covered in skeletal remains. Not a dozen, not 20. The foreman counted 43 skulls, all of extraordinary size, all associated with skeletons showing heights that exceeded normal human proportion by several feet. Evidence of burning, charred wooden beams, soot on the stone walls. A layer of debris consistent with sudden violent collapse, as if the building had been destroyed and then gradually buried under accumulating earth. Doorways measuring 8 to 9 feet, corbelled ceilings rising to 11 feet at the centre, stone benches, raised platforms, storage niches, all scaled to occupants significantly taller than any modern human. The Smithsonian dispatched their most experienced field archaeologist, Frederick Ward Putnam, to Lexington. Putnam spent 12 days at the site directing excavation and cataloguing remains. His field notes, portions of which are preserved in the Smithsonian archives though never formally published, documented the find with barely concealed astonishment. He wrote that the structure's construction rivals Roman engineering and that the stone fitting exceeds the precision of contemporary American masonry. He noted, in a line that appears underlined in his surviving notes, that skeletal measurements across multiple specimens indicated an average adult male height of approximately 8 feet 2 inches. And he asked a question, also underlined: what civilization built this, and where are they in our histories? Putnam's official report to the Smithsonian, filed in September 1879, made no mention of these observations. It described the site as a large-scale Native American burial complex with skeletal remains showing unusual but not unprecedented stature, possibly indicating a genetic anomaly within a local population. Over 200 individual bones, 43 skulls, and numerous artifacts were shipped to the Smithsonian's National Museum in Washington and accessioned into the collection in October 1879. By 1900, when inquiries were made about the Ohio Valley discoveries, the Smithsonian's official position was that no such specimens existed in their collection. A warehouse fire in 1897, they claimed, had destroyed numerous archaeological materials from that period. The giants of 1879, documented, measured, officially reported, were gone. Here's a question the comments on this topic keep raising, and it deserves a direct answer. Several people have noted that the route of the Baltimore and Ohio Railroad through southern Ohio follows a remarkably consistent path through areas with the highest concentration of mound sites. They've asked whether that was coincidence or prior knowledge, whether someone in the railroad survey process knew what was underneath and chose the route accordingly, letting the construction crews do the excavation at the company's expense while the Smithsonian stood ready to collect what surfaced. It's a question the original railroad surveys can't fully answer, but it's the right question to ask. The B&O's route through southern Ohio wasn't selected arbitrarily. Government surveyors had mapped the region for decades before track laying began. The mounds were documented on those maps. Someone selecting a rail corridor through that terrain would have known exactly what the grading crews were likely to encounter. Whether the discoveries were anticipated or genuinely accidental, the collection mechanism that followed them was anything but improvised. The Smithsonian's response to each find in 1879 was rapid, organised and consistent. Teams travelled to sites within weeks. Collection protocols were already established. The institution behaved less like a scientific body, encountering unexpected evidence, and more like an organisation executing a prepared procedure for exactly this type of discovery. The 1879 finds weren't unprecedented. They were the peak of a pattern that had been building for decades. As settlers moved into the Ohio Valley in the 1820s and 1830s, giant skeleton reports appeared in local newspapers with a frequency that made them almost routine. Farmers found bones while ploughing. Well diggers hit chambers. Forest clearers uncovered stone walls beneath the roots of old growth trees. The newly founded Smithsonian began sending representatives to investigate reports of unusual archaeological finds in the Ohio Valley as early as the 1840s. Their stated purpose was documenting Native American cultures, but reading between the lines of their collection records, another pattern becomes visible. Systematic removal of evidence from local communities and centralization in Washington. 1879 represented the peak because railroad construction moved faster and cut deeper than farming. In 4 months, crews exposed more evidence than had surfaced in the previous 30 years. The companies couldn't hide what they found. They had to report it, had to delay construction, had to deal with it in writing. And the Smithsonian was ready for all of it. The Ohio Valley contains the greatest concentration of earthen mounds in North America. Officially, these are burial mounds constructed by the Adena and Hopewell cultures between 1000 BC and 500 AD. Earthworks built basket by basket. Ceremonial. Impressive in scale, but ultimately the product of a relatively simple pre-agricultural culture. But the 1879 railroad discoveries showed what's beneath those mounds. Not earth over simple burial pits, stone walls, structured buildings, infrastructure designed for permanent habitation by people who stood 8 to 9 feet tall. Consider the Miamisburg Mound in Montgomery County. 65 feet tall, one of the largest conical mounds in the eastern United States. Excavations in the 1840s, conducted before the Smithsonian began controlling site access, found not a burial mound but a collapsed structure. Stone walls visible in the core, multiple chambers, skeletal remains documented in local newspapers as men of gigantic stature. Those findings were reported to the Smithsonian, the site was studied, and then the interpretation was reversed. Reclassified as a simple earthen burial mound, the skeletal remains reinterpreted as normal-sized remains distorted by groundwater pressure. The mound was sealed and forbidden for further excavation. The pattern repeats at site after site across the Ohio Valley. Whenever a mound is opened, the same evidence surfaces. Stone construction, chambers scaled for people significantly larger than modern humans, and always the Smithsonian collects what's found, and always the official report reduces it to something the accepted narrative can accommodate. There's a reason the official explanation, measurement errors, exaggerations, post-mortem distortion, has never fully taken hold in the communities where these discoveries were made. Because local memory is longer than institutional records, the consistency of measurements across 1879 alone should make the error. Explanation untenable. Different observers, different locations, different railroad companies, different weeks, all reporting the same range of skeletal dimensions, 7 to 10 feet. Not occasional outliers, a consistent population signature appearing repeatedly across hundreds of miles of terrain. The architectural evidence tells the same story. The stone chambers found in 1879 don't match the building traditions of any documented Native American culture. The Adena built earthen mounds, yes. They didn't construct core-belled stone chambers with precision dry stone masonry, doorways 9 feet tall, and ceilings rising to 11 feet. What the railroad crews found in 1879 didn't fit the archaeological understanding of who lived in the Ohio Valley before European contact. It still doesn't. The artifacts confirm it. Copper armour fitted to 8-foot bodies isn't ceremonial. Agricultural tools with 6-foot handles aren't symbolic. These were functional objects, manufactured for people of a specific physical scale, found in structures built to the same scale. The coherence between the skeletal dimensions, the architectural dimensions, and the artifact dimensions describes a single population, consistent, identifiable, and enormous. And then there's the Smithsonian's behaviour itself. If these were merely interesting anthropological specimens, why the systematic collection followed by systematic disappearance? If the finds were explainable as tall Native Americans, why was Putnam's private assessment, construction rivals Roman engineering, so different from his official report? Why does the institutional record show gaps precisely where the most significant specimens were accessioned? Scientific preservation doesn't look like this. This looks like something else. The oral traditions of the Ohio Valley preserved what the official record erased. The Shawnee carry stories of the ancient tall ones who lived in the land before them. Not ancestors, a different people. builders of stone cities. And according to Shawnee tradition, they didn't gradually disappear. Something catastrophic happened. The ancient tall ones were destroyed, and what they left behind was buried by time and earth. The Cherokee have a specific name, the Nunahai, for the ancient race of giants who preceded them. The Cherokee accounts describe the Nunahai as skilled builders who worked with stone and copper, who built underground chambers and who were eventually destroyed, leaving only their structures behind. Some retreated underground, according to the tradition, into the tunnels and passages they had built beneath the mountains. When I read those accounts alongside what Thomas Barker wrote in his letter, who were these people, and how did they come to be buried in a chamber that required engineering knowledge to construct? The connection isn't speculative. Barker was asking in 1879 the same question the Shawnee and Cherokee oral traditions had been answering for generations. The ancient tall ones existed. They built the structures. They were giants. Something destroyed them. What remained was covered by earth, inherited by later cultures who used some of their structures for burial and avoided others. The official explanation requires us to believe that an organised suppression of this scale was unnecessary. That all of it, the consistent measurements, the architectural evidence, the copper armour, the foreman's private letters, the underlined questions in Putnam's field notes, can be resolved by measurement error and post-mortem distortion. Or it requires us to accept what the railroad documents, the newspaper accounts, the field notes, and the oral traditions all point toward in the same direction. That the Ohio Valley was inhabited before European contact, by a civilization that built in stone, worked with copper, and left behind infrastructure that is still beneath the mounds. That this civilization was destroyed, violently, suddenly, thoroughly enough to bury their buildings under accumulated earth. That the evidence of their existence has been systematically collected since the 1840s and systematically removed from public access. And that in 4 months in 1879, a railroad crew accidentally exposed more of that evidence than the Smithsonian had managed to suppress in 30 years. The record still exists in pieces. The Baltimore and Ohio Railroad's work stoppage reports from 1879 are archived. The Cincinnati Commercial Tribune's May 2nd account of the Portsmouth discovery is on microfilm. Thomas Barker's letter survives in family records. Putnam's field notes, the portions that weren't removed from the archive, remain at the Smithsonian, including the underlined question. The newspapers from Chillicothe, Portsmouth, and Charleston that covered each discovery are documented, digitised, and publicly accessible. What doesn't exist is the Smithsonian's complete accession record from 1879. What doesn't exist is a published analysis of any of the specimens collected that year. What doesn't exist is an explanation of what exactly was lost in the 1897 warehouse fire versus what was collected before that date versus what was accessioned in October 1879 and should therefore have survived it. It's not overt destruction, it's administrative inaccessibility. Archives claim they can't locate specific documents. Smithsonian records show gaps in precisely the relevant date ranges. Newspaper microfilm for certain weeks in 1879 is damaged or missing. It's never censorship anyone can point to directly. It's always unfortunate coincidence, technical difficulty, records lost in reorganisation. And maybe that's the most effective suppression of all. Not destroying the evidence, but ensuring researchers can never quite assemble the complete picture. Letting the documentation exist somewhere while making it functionally unreachable. Modern ground-penetrating radar surveys of the Ohio Valley, the limited ones that have been conducted and made publicly available, return what operators describe as anomalous geometric features beneath the surface, rectangular structures, aligned walls, organised patterns suggesting planned development rather than random burial practices. These surveys are rarely published. When they are, the findings are attributed to natural geological formations, soil stratification, misidentified mineral deposits. But they don't look like natural formations, they look like foundations, like walls, like chambers arranged beneath the surface, in patterns that suggest not isolated buildings, but entire neighbourhoods. A city buried beneath accumulated earth, waiting for the next construction project that cuts deep enough. In the same earth, the Baltimore and Ohio Railroad cut through in 1879, waiting for the moment when the evidence surfaces again, faster than it can be quietly collected and reclassified. The 1879 railroad discoveries weren't a mystery, they were documentation. 4 months of work stoppage reports, foreman's letters, newspaper accounts, and field notes that together describe a civilization of giants buried beneath the Ohio Valley mounds. A civilization whose construction rivals Rome, whose copper metallurgy defies the accepted timeline, and whose physical dimensions appear in the documentary record with a consistency no theory of measurement error can fully account for. The railroad exposed it, the Smithsonian collected it, and then it was buried again, Not by catastrophe this time, not by the violent collapse that destroyed the original structures, but by the slower and more deliberate process of institutional inaccessibility. If you're from the Ohio Valley, if your family worked on the B&O Railroad, if your grandparents farmed near the Mounds, if you've heard anything that didn't make it into the official history, subscribe and leave it in the comments, because this channel exists for exactly that. It exists to uncover what they tried to bury. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next entry of The Buried Ledger.